Welcome to Viking.TV. I think you know exactly where I am. I'm in the most wonderful library here at Highclere Castle, which is the same library in Downton Abbey on television. But I wanted to share with you some of the places that I begin many of my journeys. It's in this marvellous section here about maps and navigation, travel, exploring the world. All Geordie's ancestors were great explorers. They wanted to see and understand the pageantry of other cultures, other places, other landscapes with their own eyes. And they were always actually going by boat. They sometimes owned their own sailing boats and would sail to Australia or across to South America. They were intrepid. And they brought back with them stories from abroad. And so did many other adventurers and travellers. So this bit is I just think it's like a treasure. It really is. And I've brought a few books out to share with you, slightly randomly, but I think maybe we should start with an atlas of the world. But of course, my atlases are slightly older, probably, than those on your phones and sat-navs. But I love them because look at the colour of them. Look at the way they're coloured and shaped and drawn. Now, where did Geordie's ancestors go? Well, of course, to Egypt, amongst other places. And I think the one at the bottom is actually less a map than a record of travels in Egypt to Nubia. Isn't that beautiful? And it was dedicated to the king, which would definitely be strategic. To your majesties. This, I hope, will have a date on it. Here we go. 1,500, 1700, and so 1755, 7. There we go. So quite a long time ago. And it's recording all that they went, because the idea of travelling around the world, travels in Egypt and Nubia, was enormously prized. This is one of my favourite books. It's a Record of Marriott, one of the earliest travellers in Egypt. And I know Viking ships go up and down the Nile. And of course, I have been on several of them too, with much joy. And these are some of the plates from that time. But they are rather wonderful. And I hope if you go round, you will take some photographs. That's Karnak Temple, from Karnak Temple, and print them out. Amazing records of what it looked like then. Marriott was one of the most important French explorers. Voyage dans l'Haute Égypte, Première Cataract, between Cairo and the Premier Cataract, 1893. Thebes, Karnak, Ramesseum. So I suppose the earliest of photography is in this book. But this is the temple of Hatchet, de Albar, but it didn't look like that when we were there, and it's been restored. So I imagine that's a worked up sketch of what people assumed it must have been like. In fact, the main thing to say is how much greener it would have been then. Beautiful. I hope some of you get out your books as well and atlases before you travel. Oh, this is quite fun. This is Venice. There we go. History, art and industry of the town, and all about the life. And actually, it's all about travel. So this is in French. And it's sharing with you how they navigated their way to Venice and what you should look out for when you're there, and imagines what some of the boats might have looked like at that time. I did a tour with Viking, beginning in Venice and going to Istanbul, which was completely magic. If you're going to Florence with Viking or as a traveller yourself, this might be the book you might need. It's all about Florence. Beautiful silk lining here. 1880, so it's not quite so old. Beautifully put together. Florence and travels through the classical world was such an important part of English education. And the romance of Italy and Greece is just imbued in all of our architecture. Interestingly, this was a much more classical building until it was transformed by Barry in 1842. So it went from the classical romanticism to the Gothic, to the medieval, to the celebration of medieval England, which was what the Victorians in particular through poets like Tennyson were looking back to. But the spirit of this house was deeply classical. The fourth Earl of Carnarvon was a classicist, one of the foremost ones during his time at Eton. Fluent in Latin and ancient Greek. So he would be standing here in front of you talking in Latin, but apparently he could speak ancient Greek even better. Fortunately for all of you, I can speak neither fluently. He also spoke French and German and Italian, as did his son, the fifth Earl of Carnarvon, whose life was spent pursuing his dream of treasure and adventure and knowledge in Egypt. He also spoke French fluently, some German, quite a lot, Italian, some Latin, some Greek, and some Arabic. So I think I need to brush up on most of my languages. And this is just a beautiful book about Florence. So when you go on your Mediterranean cruises on the Viking ships, I'm sure one of the excursions will be to Florence. And again, it is an extraordinary city. And I'm quite sure it's better to pick up some of those cruises during the off months of the year when there is less people in Florence. So I don't think it really matters when you go, and there's something to be said for on the shoulder months in the spring or the autumn. This is a very small, slim book. But again, it's about travel. In this case, Travels in America. This is volume 2, I've clearly picked out, rather than volume 1. And I think it dates from 1775. It's about the interior parts of America in a series of letters by an officer. So it starts, "My dear friend, November 17, 1777. In military operations, the conqueror is delighted to honour the good conduct and bravery of the defeated." Well, that's clearly going to a little bit of military history, which I think I'm going to skip by. I imagine he was also going into the interiors. "At a house where I slept in the Jerseys, the owner, who was a friend of the government, had left an exceeding fine plantation near Trenton and retired to this place. The inhabitants of New York, as well as the Jerseys, are chiefly the posterity of the first settlers into those provinces, who were Dutch, and they seem to retain their principles, industry, frugality, and an assiduous perseverance in the means of thriving." Well, I think that's very positive. Some of the curses in here reflect an older language where an S looks like an F, actually a little bit more similar to German. And, oh look, I love maps. This seems to me to possibly, oh no, it's a sketch. Encampment of the Convention Army at Charlottesville in the Virginia after they had surrendered to the Americans. That was one war the Americans won. And then finally, I've got one more book beneath it. Isn't this lovely? It's definitely quite old and probably needs rebounding. So it's about the zoology of northern parts of British America. So that is 1,500, 600, 829 was when it was published. I wonder if that is therefore referring to Canada. There is so much in here. I think I could spend every day exploring somewhere else. So that's the prairie wolf. Look at these engravings. It was a wild country to go and explore and to settle in those days. Animals that nobody had ever seen. And of course, trees that were not native to this country were brought back here. So in the 19th century, the first great sequoia gigantica were brought back here. We call them Wellingtonians, and the Americans wanted to call them Washingtonians. But an Englishman got back to Kew to try to name it for the great Duke of Wellington, one of our great generals. And he thought he registered it before anybody in America had registered it. He wanted to call it for the Duke of Wellington, and in America they wanted to call it for George Washington. So that's why it's called Sequoia, somewhere in between. But we still call them Wellingtonians. And these are just some of the beautiful engravings of the mammals. And the little mammals too. It's not just the large animals. Just look at all of this. All of these bookshelves here are full of treasures. Ancient Athens, the Chateau of Touraine, travel in the East, a year in Spain, Turkey, Bermuda, the Aborigines of Victoria in Australia. And here, what have we got over here? Passage par Guédis. I guess it's a French author there who I'm not familiar with. This is lovely. This is Lady Stanhope. Lady Stanhope's Traveller, an English lady who went off travelling through the Middle East. She was well ahead of her time. And I think she left her husband here to go travelling through the Middle East. That's a book to read. So this part of the library is about travel, about maps, where you dreamt of going, where you dream of going today. And it inspires me to find out where I'm going. And when I do book a book somewhere to travel to, and for example, I've actually booked to go up the Rhine with Viking next April. And my starting point will be to find a map here and to see where I might be going, what I should be looking for. And I know the expeditions are really well organised, but I've never been up the Rhine and I'm really looking forward to it. It may be rainy, it doesn't matter. It'll be a really comfortable boat with excellent food and probably some great cathedrals and castles to see. So my starting point will be here, and perhaps that's another thing to share with you on another excerpt from Viking.TV.